You picked the cereal with the bright red berries on the front, not the plain one. Your kid actually eats it, which is half the battle most mornings. Fair trade-off, except the FDA already revoked the approval for the dye that makes it that red a year and a half ago. It's just that the deadline to actually take it out of your box hasn't arrived yet. Before this video is over, you'll know exactly which deadline applies to what's in your pantry right now, which state has already forced the change, and why already banned and still legal to sell are both true about the same product at the same time. In January 2025, the FDA revoked the food authorization for FD&C Red No. 3. The dye, also known as erythrocene, under a piece of law called the Delaney Clause. That clause is unusually rigid for food regulation. It doesn't weigh risk against benefit. It doesn't ask how much you'd have to eat before it mattered. If a color additive is shown to cause cancer in animals or humans, the FDA is not allowed to keep it authorized. Full stop. That's why Red 3 came down. Cancer in laboratory rats, documented since the 1990s, and a law that gives regulators no room to look the other way. Food manufacturers have until January 15, 2027 to finish taking it out of products. Drug manufacturers get until January 2028. Until those dates pass, Red 3 is simultaneously banned and legal to sell. Banned in the sense that its authorization has been revoked. Legal in the sense that the compliance clock hasn't run out. Red 3 is not the only synthetic dye this applies to. According to industry ingredient tracking data, tens of thousands of products on U.S. shelves contain just one of its relatives: Red 40E, cereals, sports drinks, gummy candy, fruit snacks, flavored yogurt. That single number should tell you this isn't a story about one ingredient in one product. It's a story about a category. I want to bring in someone who's tracked this fight for years, because I don't want you to take my framing of loophole on faith. Thomas Galligan is the principal scientist for food additives and supplements at the Center for Science in the Public Interest. When the FDA announced its plan for the other 6 major dyes in 2025, he expected a ban. He didn't get one. His reaction on NPR: the FDA has the authority to ban them outright if they wanted to. It didn't. What it announced instead was something closer to a handshake deal. Here's what that handshake actually covers. 6 dyes: red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, blue 1, blue 2, and green 3, are the subject of a voluntary phase-out the FDA and food industry reportedly agreed to. Not a rule, not a regulation, not anything with an enforcement mechanism attached. The target was the end of 2026. Reporting through early 2026 shows that target has already slipped in practice toward 2027, and the FDA's own tracking of which companies have actually signed on remains incomplete. That gap, mandatory versus voluntary, is the entire reason already banned and still on the shelf can both be true. Red 3 sits inside the Delaney Clause, which leaves no discretion once the cancer evidence exists. The other 6 dyes sit outside any binding law at all. They are exactly as regulated today as they were in 2024. The only thing that's changed is an announcement. A Consumer Reports survey from March 2026 found that 72% of U.S. adults are at least somewhat concerned about synthetic dyes in food, and 66% think companies should be legally required to phase them out, not just asked to. The public appetite for a binding rule already exists. What doesn't exist yet is the rule. Here's a detail most coverage skips, and it's the one that makes this tangible instead of abstract. The European Union has required warning labels on foods containing several of these same synthetic dyes since 2010. If a product sold in France or Germany contains Red 40, the package has to say so prominently in a way U.S. packaging never has to. Some of the exact same global brands sell a naturally colored version of a product in Europe and a synthetically dyed version of the identical product under the identical name in the United States. Not because the recipe requires the dye, but because nothing in U.S. law requires them to change it. You can verify this yourself with 2 minutes and an ingredient list. Search for the EU version of a product you already own and compare. The response from individual companies has been uneven enough that grouping them together would be misleading. PepsiCo committed to removing dyes from Lay's and Tostitos by the end of 2025, but those products barely use synthetic dyes to begin with. Its commitments for dye-heavy brands like Doritos, Gatorade, and Mountain Dew are considerably softer. General Mills and Kellogg's have pledged full removal from their portfolios, with a deadline that stretches to the end of 2027. Retailers are moving on their own separate timeline entirely. Target announced in February 2026 that by the end of May, its entire cereal assortment, not just its own store brand, every cereal it sells, name brands included, would carry no certified synthetic colors. That's a retailer-level policy that exists independently of what any single manufacturer decides to do. 3 different actors, 3 different speeds, none of them bound by the same clock. State governments aren't waiting for any of this to sort itself out. Utah's school food dye law became active for the 2026-2027 school year term, which started a few weeks ago as of this video. Virginia passed its own school dye ban, but its compliance date isn't until July 1st, 2027, a full year still to run. California's law reaches 6 dyes in schools starting December 31st, 2027. West Virginia's school meal provisions have been in force since August 2025, but a broader statewide version of that law is currently blocked by a federal court injunction, a reminder that even a passed law isn't automatically a settled outcome. The regulatory map right now is less a single national policy than 50 separate experiments running at once, most of them ahead of the federal government, not behind it. So what do you actually do with this in your kitchen? 4 things, and none of them require anything beyond what's already in your hand. First, read the ingredient list for the specific names: FD&C Red No. 3, red number, 40, yellow number 5, yellow number 6, blue number 1, blue number 2, green number 3. These aren't hidden under a generic color-added label. They're required to be listed by name. Second, check the brand against CSPI's corporate commitment tracker before you assume a company's public pledge means the product in your hand has already changed. The tracker sorts major manufacturers into 4 tiers, from full removal to no plan at all, and it's kept current as commitments shift. Third, know your state. If your kids are in Utah public schools, this is already active. Virginia's rule doesn't bind until mid-2027. Everywhere else, assume nothing has changed yet, regardless of what a federal announcement implied. Fourth, treat any by the end of 2026 language as a target, not a guarantee. Galligan's own assessment, from a separate CSPI statement on this same phase-out, it remains to be seen if food companies will comply with this new request. Voluntary industry promises on dye removal have been made and broken before, more than once over the past 15 years. This pattern isn't unique to dyes, and it's worth knowing that before we go further in this series. Titanium dioxide, a whitening agent linked to genetic damage concerns and already restricted in the EUE, isn't even covered by the current voluntary dye effort at all. It sits in a separate regulatory blind spot entirely. And underneath both of these sites a bigger structural question. How does any food additive get approved with so little updated review in the first place? That's what the next video in this series is going to open up, a legal category called GRAS, generally recognized as safe, that has let more than 100 food chemicals reach the market with essentially no formal FDA review at all. You're back at the cereal aisle, same bright red berries on the box, same kid tugging your sleeve. This time you flip it over. You're not looking for a warning, there isn't one, not in this country, not yet. You're looking for 3 letters and a number, and now you know what it means if you find them and what it means if you don't. This channel exists to tell you what the published evidence and the regulatory record actually say, not what the label says. If you want the next one, subscribing is how you get it. I'll see you in the next one.